Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peya Perek Aleph Halacha Hey. We left off. We're going to be learning today Daf Tes Vav, but we left off on Daf Yud Dalid Amid Beis in the beginning of the Gemara, right? 7 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Lo Olam Hu Noisein V'Chulei. The Mishnah taught that if Peya is designated after Meruach, that Peya will be subject to Meiser. The Gemara is going to begin by pointing out that Bikurim is not the same. Actually, based on a question of the Girsa in our Gemara on the beginning of Daf Tezvav, really it's a quotation from a Braisa, or perhaps just the Gemara, there's going to be 2 mamish, completely different ways of learning this at the beginning of today's Daf. We'll try to learn both ways. And it's mamish fascinating how you see how one word really changes everything. The Gemara from there is going to go on to be medayik in the opening word in the Mishnah. The Mishnah began, Mishnah Hey, Lo Oilam Hu Noisen Mishum Peya. That word Lo Oilam is teaching us something. That word is not needed. It is needed because it's being meramis to the following. First of all, when a person designates Peya in the right amount, as we learned, a 60th, once you made that designation, and let's go actually the way, if I'm not mistaken, that Rambam says that you have to verbally designate it. This, I'm leaving this for Peya. No further designation of Peya could take in effect. You already separated Peya. However, if you say you're adding to the Peya, being that you want to leave it for the poor, it doesn't have a din of Peya, it has a din of Hefkid for the poor. Now comes the question. Really, Machlekes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, and it's very unusual that the Mishnah, Stam Mishnah, should follow Shittas Beis Shammai, which will be the case over here. Beis Shammai holds that if someone is mafkid only for aniyim, it's called hefkid. Beis Hillel doesn't agree with that. And ulamai nafkimina, I'll tell you why. Because just like Peya is exempt from Meiseres, hefkid is also exempt from Meiseres. So the Gemara is going to be medayik from the Lo Olam that our Mishnah follows Beis Shammai, even though after you designated the 60th, if you lechatchila designated more, you can do that. Like we learned in the opening Mishnah of the Masechta, that ein lahem shir. If I designate 3/4 of my field lechatchila for peyatz peya, but once I made the designation, if I gave the amount necessary midrabanan, if I make a new designation, dinoi really kehefkid, but it's still going to be exempt from meises like shittais Beis Shammai. Now we're going to have on Daf Tezvav Amid Beis, we're going to be going through the Mishnah. So we're going to review the din that midoiraisa, a person is allowed to plant untithe produce. Midoiraisa. Midrabanan, you're not allowed to do it after the Meruach. But prior to the Meruach, even midrabanan, you are allowed to plant untithe produce. We will also learn the next part of the Mishnah that if a kohen or a Levi, if they buy untithe produce after the Meruach, not only do they have to separate Trumas from Meisers, but they cannot keep it. And we already learned so many times together that even though everyone knows Meiser Rishon goes to a Levi, Meiser Rishon could go to a Kohen, which means that Midoiraisa, if a Kohen buys untithe produce, he buys it, he separates Trumas from Meisers, and he keeps it. Midrabanan, he's not allowed to do it. Midrabanan, after the Meruach, he has to give it to another Kohen or another Levi. But again, prior to the Meruach, of course, he has to separate it, but he gets to keep it. And finally, what we'll have today, something that we didn't learn in the Mishnah, based on a pasuk in Shoftim. That when a person shechts domesticated animals and a side of Shitas Rabbi law, we paskin like him, that says it's only Be'eretz Yisrael, everyone else holds it's everywhere. And throughout history, there were great people that Taki gave this everywhere. They gave what they called the matanos, which is the gifting, which is large pieces of every animal. The zraya, the lichoyayim, and the keva. We'll speak about it when we get to, you have to give it to a kohen. Same question. If there's a kohen, a butcher, let's go in Eretz Yisrael, where you have to give the korbanos. Or, again, according to almost everyone everywhere, can he keep it for himself? So we have the same concept that this the Rabbanon, but there's a nuance. For the first week, he gets to keep it, and afterwards he has to give it to another kohen. We'll see why is that. Let's hit right away Let's dive right into it. I hope everyone has a sharp mind, because again, we're going to do our best to get it in. It's mamish gavaldik. Whoever is using an art scroll, we're going to be learning the Gemara the way he interprets it, which is mamish hadas yachid derashadilio. And then I want to go over, and the Gemara is going to be a whole new Gemara according to the Marafulda and according to the Pnei Moshe. It's all based on one word. But let's begin like this. Okay, in other words, you are exempt from Maisris until the Miruach. After the Miruach, as we said so many times, since the Chiyuv of Maisris is Chal, just because now you separated Peah, it won't be exempt from that Peah. Says the Gemara that Rabbi Yosi, in the name of Rabbi Yaakov Bar Zavdi, in the name of Rab Abahu, and also Rab Nechemia Bar Mar Ukvan, and Umatiba. Some people are inclined to say that the following statement came to us in the name of the great Rabbi Yochanan. Here we go. Hifrish bikurim mikri memoirach bikurim, which has to be separated from the Shivas Haminim. The right way of doing it is that when the first of any one of these seven begins to ripen, you put a gemi. A gemi would be today a rubber band. Then they didn't have rubber bands. They took a certain type of grass and they would tie it on that pomegranate, lamashal, and they would declare this to be bikurim. Of course, it just began to bud. But like this, when everything else is ready, you remember which one was the first, and that has to be gifted to the kohen after taking it to the Beis Hamikdash, and after the whole Pashas Kisavi begin. Now, same thing. If a person did not separate bikurim from the beginning, as they should have, the person, let's say, chitam and so'irim are chayvim bikurim. The person harvested their field. They didn't separate bikurim. They made ruach, and then I forgot bikurim. So they separate bikurim. So what happens over here? If you separate it, become a krima moirach. The first way we're going to learn the Gemara, we're going to go quick, guys, is that even though our Mishnah said the words by Peah, the words in the Mishnah was patur min ha'maises. And here, let's go in the last version, that it came to us through Rabbi Yochanan, that the words are patur mitruma gedoyla. Our Mishnah that said maiser didn't only mean maiser, it meant maisres and trumas. And this statement also means not only truma gedoyla maiser. That's going to be, I know it's a das yachid, but it's the easiest way of learning the Gemara. I know the art scroll typed it this way. In other words, we don't say the din of Peah by bikurim. Bikurim is different. Even though you only woke up to separate bikurim, even after the Gemara Malacha, after the Gemara Malacha means after there's a chiyuv of maisres, including truma. No. When you separate bikurim from that, you don't have to separate Truma Gedoyla, you don't have to separate Meiser Rishon, you don't have to separate Meiser Sheni. It's exempt from Meisers. That's one way of learning Pshat. Again, it's only one way of learning that. Now, the Gemara says, Amar Rab Chagai, in front of Rabbi Yosi, Masnisa Amar Kain. According to the way we're learning the Gemara, the word Masnisa, which by the way, what does it mean? It's good for in Bavli, it's so easy. In Bavli, Tana Rabbanan is a Braisa, Tanya is a Braisa. Kanan is a Mishnah. When they're quoting, you can see from the word Masnisa. Here, let's go, our version, a Braisa. There is a Braisa that says so befedish. And that's one girsa, guys. And what steht in the Braisa? That who la'olam who noisem mishum peyam upatim in a meiser achi moreach. This is mamish opening up like we have the words in the Mishnah. Now we're going to Daf Tezvav Medalev. According to this girsa, we are continuing to read the words of the Braisa. The Braisa says befedish. See, the Mishnah doesn't say it. Ha'im meirach. The Braisa says it. But once you did the meiruach, then you're chayiv to separate from the Peah maisres. Maisres means truma and maiser and everything. And now the Braisa says clearly, Mashe Enkein. Here's the problem. You see, if you look inside the Gemara, it says the word truma. If this is truma, the whole thing doesn't fit. So the girsa here, according to this version that we're learning, is bibikurim, and that fits. Mashe Enkein bibikurim. In other words, this is mamish like Rabbi. Bikurim is different. Now, what does it mean bikurim is different, guys? Let me tell you something. Bikurim is different can go both directions. Bikurim is different could mean the way we just learned from Rabbi Yochanan. That even though you did the meruach, you already did the meruach. You're chayiv to Musamaisas. Now that you separate bikurim, which you should, you don't have to give. You can learn it mamish the opposite way. You can learn Masha Inkein if the gear says bikurim, that even if you took bikurim at the right time, which is from the beginning, before the meruach, you're still chayiv to separate from the bikurim to Musamaisas. So that's the Gemara's point. So frag the Gemara, let's go with this girsa. Let's assume that that's the version. Just because the Braisa says Masha Inkin Bikurim, we don't know which direction. Why don't we interpret Bikurim? All the Braisa says is Bikurim is not like Peah, but how it's not different, we don't know. That Bikurim Yechayev Afapishu Meirach. Maybe that's the way. So you can bring a raya from the Braisa. So to which the Gemara says, you're right, Bisgerecht. I cannot bring a raya from the Braisa, but Vaida Amrada, I'm certain that I can learn the din. Let's go. That Umati ba Mishum Rabbi Yochanan. I can know it from the following. What's the following? So here we're quoting a Mishnah, and what states in the Mishnah? Mishnah and Truma is Lama Nikra Shuma Bikurim. Why is it called Bikurim? Shehem Bikurim Lakoil. Because Bikurim means first. They are first to all. First to all means that the chiyuv. What do you have to separate first? We're going to be for a farmer. The first is Bikurim. When it just begins to bud, you already have to mark it. And mamish, when you pick it, meaning the fact that it's called Bikurim, because it's the first, says the Gemara the following logic. Whichever one comes first, the other one is subject to it. I'll give you a great example before we come to Bikurim. They're supposed to separate, guys, remember this, simple rule. Truma Gedoyla before Ma'aser Rishon. What happens after the Meruach? The Chacham separated Ma'aser Rishon. Do you know what has to happen? The Levi that got the Ma'aser Rishon, normally the Levi only has to separate Ma'aser Min HaMa'aser. Before he does Ma'aser Min HaMa'aser, he's going to have to separate the percent of Truma Gedoyla from what he received, In other words, when the Torah says that A and then B, if you did B before A, then you don't get away with it. Then from B, you have to take away A. In other words, let's go in the other direction. Since Bikurim has to come first, not second, so in that direction, from the Bikurim, you don't separate Trumas Umaiser because it's before Trumas Umaiser. So now that it's clear from the Mishnah that from Bikurim you don't separate Trumas Umaiser, now when you learn the Braisa, and the Braisa says Masha Enkin, it can only be in the direction that Rabbi Yochanan said, which is by Peah, once you did the Miruach, you have to separate Maisers from that which you did Miruach, even though it's going to be Peah. First, separate them, all of the Maisers. By Bikurim, even though you woke up late, okay, that's one version. Now the question is why tak? Why would it be that way? Because the logic that we had in the Mishnah, the way we explained it, was beautiful. Once there's a chalois chiyuv Maisers, I'm sorry, my friend. How do you exempt it just because you separated Bikurim? What would be the logic over here? Now, guys, this way of learning the Gemara is only the Rashi Eliyov. So look inside on Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph, the last line on the right column of the Rashi Eliyov. So v'kasheli yachi peyanami kadmelo truma. The logic of the Gemara that what kol hakodim is chaver, chaver is chayiv boy, and not the other way around. Well, same thing, guys. Peya, you have to separate peya. Really, min hakama. You have to separate peya before you're even chayiv and trumas umaises. So why don't we say the same thing? So v'chiyafrisha acher miruach, even though you did it late, right at the top of the left column of the Rashi Eliyov, nami tifta mitruma. What would be the higoyin? What would be the nafkamina logic? Explains that Rashi Eliyov. I'll tell you. V'nichali. No, makes sense. Peya has no kedusha in view to it. Where does that express itself? By the fact that if a person who left the peya, if a non-oni came wrongfully and took it, aganef, he won't be chayiv misa. There's no kedusha there. Another expression of the fact that it's chulin. If the ani wants, the ani can sell it to whoever he wants, to a asher. You can buy it from an ani and va'achal. Masha'en came since bikurim. Bikurim, my friends, has a din of truma. Bikurim is mamish holy like truma. Masha'en bikurim the kedishi. So first of all, since it's holy, therefore, even though there was a chalois chiyuv maisris, but since at least now you separate and it's kadosh, that kedusha removes the obligation from. Why? It has to be explained. But you see that Rashi Eli himself gave another logic. V'oid the bikurim koinen shem b'mechuber lekarka ve'enam tloyim b'ketzira ela b'bikur. in the right way, not when the person woke up late. When is there a chalois chiyuv bikurim? Not connected to any human intervention. No, I know that the owner should put a gemi for him to know which one was first. But really, you know when the chiyuv bikurim was chal? When it began to ripen. In other words, really there was a chiyuv not because of I did something, and therefore if I did it late, now it's too late. The chiyuv was there from the beginning. That makes sense. Mashe enken by peya the beketsinas by law by lecha talia milsa. It depends on the harvesting. Before you harvest, you're not even chayiv. So there's a logic to say that something whose chiyuv is only triggered by human action. If the human woke up late by giving payah, it's too late. Because God gave him a lot of power. By bikurim, we have no power. We have just an obligation. We don't trigger anything. That's gaval. Ad Khan, one version. Now go back in the Gemara, and let's learn the whole Gemara again. I really hope we have time. It's so gishmak. And let me tell you something that we didn't say Friday. But what we're saying now is the Pnei Moshe, and it's the Marafulda. And they say like this. When the Mishnah says that payah is exempt from Maisris, guys, this is a big thing, this. They all understand the Mishnah is dafka only speaking about Maisris. The Mishnah is not speaking about Truma. That you're chayiv to give Truma from payah. Everything we said, you pater only before the Meruach. After the Meruach, you're chayiv to give Maisir. After the Meruach, I'm sorry, pay is exempt from everything, from Truma Maisris. When the Mishnah says that if you wake up too late by payah and you did the Meruach, now what? Now you're chayiv in what? So we don't think you're chayiv in everything. So everyone says, no. The Gemara is trying to point out you're only chayiv in Maisir. You're only chayiv, you're still not chayiv in Truma. Now, the ani will have to separate Truma. The object, the produce will be chayiv, but the ani has to give it. So when the ani gets it, instead of him getting it clear and free, no, he has to separate 2%. But the ma'aser, before the owner gives it to the ani, the owner has to give ma'aser. So the ani should not lose out by the fact, but truma, the balabas doesn't have to give. The ani has to give. And that's the meaning. Let's go back to the Gemara. So Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yaakov bar Zabdi b'Shem Rabbo, and also Rabbi Nachemya bar Mar Ukvan. And some people have this inclined that it came to the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that Hitrish b'Kurim making him moirach. Just like by payah. If you woke up too late, even though now there's a chiyuv of Trumas or Maisris, but the Mishnah is saying that the owner has to give Maiser. But the owner doesn't have to give Truma Gedolah. That goes on the ani. Same thing by Bikurim. If the person woke up too late and he only gave Bikurim after the Meirach, the owner doesn't have to give Truma Gedolah, but the owner has to give Maiser. And for that, the Gemara wants to bring a raya. Omar Abchage, Kumin Rabbi Yechanan, Masnisa means our Mishnah. I'll be medayik from our Mishnah. What's the deal from the Mishnah? Now we're not quoting a Braisa, we're quoting a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, what word does the Mishnah use? Not Truma Gedolah, Maiser. Turning to Daf Tezvav. What are you chayvin? You're chayvin Maiser. Mashe'en kain. Now you can read the word. Mashe'en kain Truma. Our Mishnah is telling you that Truma, you won't have to give. Now hold on. The product has to be Trumad, but the Balabas doesn't have to give it. Who has to give it? The Ani. What will be the logic? We're going to read inside the Rid Dvaz. We never learned him yet. So he'll explain the same logic that we have in the Mishnah. The same logic will go for Bikurim. It's a whole different Gemara. Guys, let's go to the second shtickle, not the lowest. Ma she'en kein b'truma. It's probably 10 lines down, and the little skinny Dvaz. The Balabai is patela hafish truma ma'apei. Af shekvar nismareya. Notice when the Mishnah says meiser dafke meiser the im. Now what's the logic? He gives a beautiful. If he would have given it to the ani before the miruach, the ani would have been patela achar miruach. So why should the ani lose out? Because the balabas is ashlamazel. He woke up late. So ela lahafsid lo ani and v'chayev balabais lahaflish. So the balabas has to give the meiser before he gives it to the ani. We know, let's say the ani is getting 60%, a 60th. That's it, 60th from the field. The ani is going to get the 60th. But everything has to be tithed. Yeah, whatever you separated, first give 10%, my sedition, and make sure what remains is whatever the ani would have gotten before, because you woke up late. Avol betruma, the afim you know saloni apay kodim meruach or you chayav lafresh truma. That's it. Okay, the Ritva is learning that truma gedoyla is always obligated to give. Peya has to be. You have to separate truma. Anyways, he wouldn't have kept the 2%. The only difference is that if the balabas did it rightfully, the balabas would have had the work to separate and the merit whom to choose. Now that the balabas did it after the meruach, so the ani has to do the work and the ani gets the schus. But he's not losing. Anyways, he would have to give it. How amazing is that? I want to scoot down. Look inside Saint Ritva's. I think it's like 6 lines in the Rashi Elio. Amai, that's going to be the next Gemara's question. V'leima explains that it was the kashem. Mamish Gavald. That amai im nasen pei mi morachas ena mafresh truma. Nehei de ein hefsed lo ani de balafach chayv pei betruma. Mikamakim let the balabas have to do the work. Ye balabas chayv la hafresh truma kiven shechal al vach lishenes mareich. Elamuchach maacha. That what? That the hachiyuvim shechalu all of karim amiruach hem koidmin lo oilam va'filu im noisan oisam la'achar miruach and v'hilkach kiven the chiyuv peyachal all of koidem miruach, even though he gave it after the miruach ein chayv lahafresh truma dafke b'maiser. So all of that is the Gemara's logic for bikurim. That's the lie from the Mishnah. That what? That since bikurim is chal before the miruach, since the chiyuv of bikurim is chal kodem miruach, it's a whole new Gemara. So therefore, you have to separate truma gedoyla. You separate. There has to be a separation of truma gedoyla from the bikurim. That's what Rabbi Yechanan is saying. That hifrish bikurim mikrim meidach patem truma gedoyla. What does it mean patem truma gedoyla? The recipient has to give truma gedoyla. The owner doesn't have to give it. We're making a whole new din over here. We're saying that maestris you would be exempt. After the miruach you're chayiv. So now you separate it. That which you were chayiv before truma gedoyla remains on the product, but you don't have to give it. Let the ani give it. So the Gemara is asking, that Rabbi Yosef who the Ka'amalo Matchala the Muchach Rav Chaim Mas Nissen that it's saying the guys the first line in the Ritva did the doch the Ka'amart that had the Tani be Mas Nissen lo'egam lo'esam shum pei abatam anamaysa dafke be Maysa but truma chayiv. The only part is alachiv ala ani the chol pei chayiv truma imkein vadai the peya chayiv bebikurim. It's a whole new question now, which means that you have to separate peya from bikurim. Never thought about it. If you have to separate truma gedoyla, then you should have to separate peya. V'habalei letana de masnisan lefaresh the chayiv habalabayis lahafresh bikurim al hapeya af im loy meirach. The hachiyuv bikurim koidem lechiyuv peya v'chal habalabayis. In other words, if you're telling me that there's a chiyuv of truma gedoyla, that's the word over here. Truma means if we are learning that there's a chiyuv of truma gedoyla on peya, then there should be a chiyuv of what? Of truma gedoyla also on bikurim. Why don't we learn it anyway? So the whole thing now is akasha. The lema habi bikurim yechayiv and truma gedoyla afa pishalei meira. And vaidai amra da, I'm just continuing to read, according to everyone over here, is not an answer, is explaining the question. Now why, the Mishnah says in Maestris, why is it called bikurim? Because the bikurim lakoil. V'chol hakoidim is chaverim is chayiv boy. So it's coming out. The Gemara is asking that if your logic is correct, then there has to be an obligation to separate to separate the Truma Gedoyla from the Bikurim. And not Dafke by the Meruach. And nowhere do we have such a thing. What we know is that whatever you give to the Kohen, guys, Bikurim, he gets to keep it. It doesn't have to separate Truma Gedoyla. And that's a kasha on this whole understanding that Truma Gedoyla is obligated to be removed from Payah. Only Maisris is exempt. And that Chi of Maisris is Chal on the Balabayis if he did the Payah after the Miruach. Okay, that's a whole new pshat in the Gemara, and let's move on back. And as we mentioned in the intro, if you look at the Mishnah begins with the words Lo Oilam Hu Noisen Mishum Payah. Why Lo Oilam? Why do we just say that a person has to give, when a person gives Payah, they're exempt from Maisis? If you gave Payah after Miruach, then you're chayiv to give Maisis. Why do you have to say the word Lo Oilam? And the answer will be, it must be, like we spoke out in the intro, guys, listen to this. If I separated Payah and I gave the right amount, I could have given as much as I wanted, but I didn't give. I gave the 60th. I was generous. I gave more. Doesn't matter. I gave what I gave. This is Payah. After I made that designation, what happens if I'm going to add to the Payah? Is it really Payah? No, it's not. You can't. But on the other hand, the fact that the person says it's Payah, what he means is I'm leaving it for the poor. That's called Hefker La'ani. Hefker is exempt from Maisus. Hefker is exempt from Maisus. Question is, if something which is only Hefker La'aniyim, is it called Hefker or not? And the reason why the Mishnah says the words Lo Oilam is to tell you that we paskin like Beishamai, that Hefker, only La'aniyim is called Hefker. Lo Oilam, you can add to Payah, and you'll be exempt from Maisus. Even though it's not really Payah, but it's Hefker. Hefker is also exempt from Maisus. Masnisa, the Beishamai yoim them Hefker, Aniyim, Hefker, only for Aniyim is called Hefker. And therefore, even though it's not Payah, but it's Hefker. Masha'enken lebeis Hillel, once you designated Payah, the minimum amount was just midrabanan. Once I did that, I cannot add to it. And if I added to it, it's meaningless. Now, can I keep it? No, I gave a gift. But just because I gave a gift, it doesn't make it exempt. And if I didn't separate the Maisris, then the Aniyim have to. Just want to say that going forward, we're going to learn, if not, we'll get confused, just the din. Not like the Marafulda and the Pnei Moshe that understand the Gemara as being machalik between Maisir and Truma Gedoyla. We're going to learn pshat that exempt from Maisris means that you're exempt from everything. And after the Meruach, you're chayiv and everything. Okay. The next din in the Mishnah was that the noitel min agoyren v'zoreya. Guys, remember this. Midoiraisa, even after the Meruach, if I am choosing not to eat my grain, if I want to replant it, I don't have to separate anything for the coin for the lady. Midrabanan, they don't allow me to do that. There's a fear that I'm going to plant it, I won't separate it, and then I'm going to wait. You know what? It's not going to rain this season. I'm going to remove it from the ground. I'm going to eat it. So they says, no. That if you're planting it, you have to separate Trumas u'Maisros, even from what you're planting. Says our Mishnah, that there was already a chiyuv to be ma'aser. That means before the Meruach, you're not chayiv. Okay. It says the Gemara. Now here we had in the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva, right? This is the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. Divrei Rabbi Akiva says the Gemara Va'asya that Rabbi Akiva, this halacha which we have from Rabbi Akiva is going to conform. It's going to be equal to a discussion in a brayso that criticizes the chanuyos, the storekeepers of Bnei Chanun, or other people are greatest Bnei Hinoi, as we will see on Amud Beis. What we are talking about, the criticism we had against them, is aligned with the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. What are we talking about? What was the criticism that was held against those storekeepers? The Tana. That Lama Charvu Chanuyos Bnei Chanun Sholoi Shonim Achali Charva Beis Hamikdash. Everything is Bashgacha Pratis. Yeah, ultimately there was a Churban everywhere, but something happened over there 3 years prior to the Churban Beis Hamikdash. For what violation? Shehoyu Moitzian Es HaPeiros Bichlal HaMaisros. they behaved in a way which, according to them, exempted all of the produce that they sold from the obligation of it being tithe. And how did they do that? Because they darshan, when we have in Parshas 3a, when we have the obligation, right, aser to aser, eis kol tfuas zar echa. So there is a certain shita that says eis kol tfuas zar echa. What does that mean, tfuas zar echa? You have to separate maasros from that which you grew. What happens if I bought? It's not, I did not grow it, even though the owner did not tithe it yet. They darshan, I'm not chayiv to tithe. That's drasha number one. That aser to aser, the prat doesn't come from the words aser to aser. It comes from the word zar echa. Only hayotze, right? Only if you grew it. But if you bought it, then you're not chayiv to obligate. When it says in that pasuk, v'achalta lifnei Hashem alikecha, you know when you have to tithe it, when you grew it. If you grew it and you're eating it. That's the way they typed it. V'achalta, rat l'moich. Now, first of all, this drasha is not wrong. Everyone agrees that midoi raisa, the obligation of all of them maasros, trumas or maasros, is only if I grew it and I'm eating it. If I'm growing it and I'm selling it, I don't have to tithe it. I'm not eating it. And the buyer doesn't have to tithe it because it's not zarecha. Even though now it's zarecha, but it's not the zarecha that grew out of this. Midrabanan, you have to tithe it. Midrabanan, you have to tithe it. Who is saying that? Very similar to our Mishnah. Let's look inside the Marafulda, the third line from the top. That be'emes bin ha'toira dinah, completely exempt. Elo sh'Rabbi Akiva mighty koidem meruach and v'osala b'achila midrabanan ke'ein da'oiraisa la'acher meruach. Eloma v'hited bezriya koidem meruach ke'ein da'oiraisa la'acher meruach. Mashe'en kein hani osi kein even la'acher meruach ve'midu devreim al din toira. And that's why they got penalized. In other words, just like we find there are rabbinic restrictions, as we see in that braisa, that even when you are exempt mid'oraisa, but midrabanan, even though you didn't grow it, you bought it, you're chayiv to tithe, and if you didn't tithe it properly, for that you go into golus. Similarly, Rabbi Akiva holds that midrabanan, when you plant, when you use grain for planting, you have to tithe it. In other words, there are many chiyuvei maasros that are only midrabanan, but we're very makbid with it. We make it as stringent as the oraisa. To go into golus is because it's a real, not only midrabanan. No, midrabanan, and therefore you're going to get into trouble. So that shita that holds that you mamish cannot plant it before tithing it, even though it's only midrabanan, that's something very strict. Now we add this thing that when are we only that strict? Since you're not obligated, that's when you can plant it. In other words, we find Rabbi Akiva, and in that braisa, the string many rabbinic obligations of tithing that we do not have. Let's go right to the next case in the Mishnah was a Kohen or a Levi. If they buy untithed produce, now there's two dinim, guys. There's the din of separating, then there's the din of eating. Now, if I'm a Yisrael, I have to separate the truma, I have to separate the meiser, I have to give it to a Kohen and to a Levi. And like we mentioned, don't forget, especially Ezra, he penalized the Levium, who very few of them came in the beginning of Zman Bayesheni. He told people to give the meiser rishon dafka to a Kohen. Meiser rishon could be given to a Kohen. A Kohen is also from the tribe of a Levi. Just to make that clear, you can give everything to a Kohen. So now the question is, what happens if there's a Kohen? The Kohen buys from the field grain that's not tithed yet. So the question is, he has to separate it. Does he get to keep it? Could he keep it? So our Mishnah taught us, it depends. If he bought it before there was an obligation of tithing, if the kohen bought it before the meruach, the kohen is going to do the meruach. The kohen is going to do the gemar malacha, whatever that's going to be. Maybe the pnei abayis. The kohen will have to separate trumas u'maasros like any other Jew, but he gets to keep it. He can say, "I separated, but I'm keeping it." But if the kohen buys produce la'acher the chiyuv of tithing la'acher meruach, he has to separate it. But midrabanan, he doesn't get to keep it. He has to give it to other kahanim. He has to give it to another Levi. Question is, why did they do that? Just for the record, it's not common for people to buy things before the miruach. So forget about, they didn't make the gezeda there. Why even la'achar miruach? So what? There's a chiyuv to tithe it. If the moicher didn't do it, the lekeach, he's doing it, and he's keeping it. And the reason for that is like this, guys. If you think about regulating prices, and you don't want to allow for people to get a monopoly in the market. Let's say a person has 100 apples. Guys, halk up. This is good techatis. And let's say the sale price for this will be $100 on $1 an apple. Let's go with that. Hold on. Let's just speak about trumas u'maasros. Just speak about that. How many apples do you have left after you separated truma and maaser? Maaser sheni you get to keep. I don't care about maaser sheni. How many apples do you have left? No, after truma you separate 2, so you have 98. Then you separate 9.8. Let's just round it off. Let's say be'erach. You have 88 apples left. So how much will it be worth now? Around $88. That means if I'm going to go buy, if I'm a Yisrael, if I'm going to go buy produce, how much will I pay for it? $88. How much will the coin pay for it? He's not going to pay 100. He's going to pay 92. He's not going to pay 100. Why should I pay 100? The guy has to separate trumas and maaser. But he'll dominate the market. He'll dominate the market. He'll pay less than the full price. Why would he pay the full price? The owner never gets the full price. The owner has to separate trumas and maaser. But he'll pay more if he gets to keep it. He's going to pay more than a Yisrael. Knas konsul lahem. Knas doesn't mean that they did anything. They did nothing wrong. It's really they can keep it. But if they would keep it, what's going to happen? Who will dominate the market? The kohanim will outbid everyone else. Because you don't want to have a product that kohanim, that a non-kohen won't be able to afford. He won't be able to afford because a kohen will pay more. The kohen will pay more because he gets to keep all of it at the end. He's not paying 100; he's paying 92, but he's keeping 100. The Yisrael cannot pay 92 because Yisrael only gets to keep 88. Kanas konsulahem shulayir koivsim legitis legironis. We don't want them. Now, one second. Who cares about that? I missed one step. Who cares about that? I'll tell you who cares about that. A kohen and a Levi, if they buy it, who will they give the trumas and maaser to? To themselves. So if kohanim and Leviim, but the maaser only, if they will be the ones that will be predominant buyers of untithed produce, no other kohen and Levi, the ones who cannot afford to buy, they'll never get trumas or maaser. That's the pshat. No, the advantage of having every Jew in the market is like this. Every Jew has his friend, a kohen and a Levi. The gift of God will be shared amongst all the Kohanim and the Leviim. If you're going to allow the kohen to keep for himself the trumas or maaser, then who's going to end up with trumas or maaser? Only the wealthy kohanim. That's the word. Because they're going to be the ones that are going to buy it. You still won't be able to, cannot outbid them. And then they're going to keep it. That's beautiful. So it's not a knas that they did nothing wrong. In order to make sure that everyone will get it, now let's use this logic for 2 other cases. Case number 1 is a tabak kohen. So as you mentioned in the intro, it says in Parshas Shoftim, so when you shecht a carbon, you have to separate from it the zroya, the lichoyayim, and the cave. We'll speak about this more in other times. That's nice parts of the animal you have to gift it to a kohen. There are many who held that this is even loig b'chutz la'aretz, and many people behave that way. There is one das of Rabbi Iloah that holds that the matanis is only shayach to Eretz Yisrael, and we rely on that, and that's a very difficult thing to know. Why? But that's the fact. No, it's a kahana Edo never got this roya, the luchayam, and the keva yet, but it's a big gift. So I have the same kasha. If you have a tabach, the butcher, the way butchers work then is the butcher bought the animal, he shechted it, and then he sold the meat. If the tabach is a kohen, does he get to keep it? And what will be the same logic? If he gets to keep it, God wants for the Zeroya de L'chaim L'Keva to be spread around all the Kanim and the Levium. Who can afford to be a butcher? Only the wealthy people. The poor people cannot afford to buy an animal. So no, we don't want to limit the gifts to the wealthy or to the tabachim. But it's not the way the Mishnah limited it. The Mishnah made a blanket statement. Once there's the meruach, you buy the produce, you kohen, you have to give it to another kohen. By a tabach, we don't say you always have to give it to the other. Chavraya, in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, they say that you get to keep it for the first week. Patar loy Shabbos echos. For 1 week you get to keep it, and then from then on, you have to give it away. So Amar Rabbi Yosi, that when I went to the south of Eretz Yisrael, the Shamis, and I heard Rab Chanan, the father of Rab Shimon. Now, who is the father of Rab Shimon by Yochai, guys? Yochai, however you pronounce the holy name over here. Obviously, this is not the Tana. Why not? Because it's being said, I got stuck for a second, in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Guys, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, just to know, was from the early era of the Amoraim. He's a contemporary with Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish. So it's an Amoira, right? So Rab Chanan, the father of Rab Shimon, unless you're going to say that the father of Shimon by Yochai lived for a few hundred years, all these things could be. I don't know, but then there's the word Chanan, it's Yochai. But anyways, so it was said in Rabbi Shua ben Levi that what? The same thing that Patalei Shabbos Achas, that if for 1 week you get to keep it, but then you have to give it away. So hold on. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yudam, Medamalei, that statement, B'Shem Rabbi Shua ben Levi, that we also learned in the name of, that what? Hadot Rabbi Yechanan, same era. What did Rabbi Yechanan say? That Rabbi Yechanan explained our Mishnah, why does a kohen have to give it to others? Kenas konsu b'hem. And Knas doesn't mean they did anything wrong. Knas konsumem, the Chachamim were concerned for only certain kohanim of keeping all the trumas u'maisros. They didn't want only the wealthy ones to get it. Same logic. Who can afford to be a tabach? Someone who has money. It's expensive to be all these businesses. And many kohanim, they don't have that money, so they're never going to get trumas u'maisros. The same logic. Amar Rabbi Yosef. Hold on, but it's not the same. Because in our Mishnah, we didn't give you a week. And our Mishnah says that if you buy untithed produce, la'achar meruach, you never get to keep it. If the reason by the tabach kohen, Shua ben Levi, is like Rabbi Yechon explained the Mishnah, let it be like our Mishnah. Answers the Gemara. This is so good, and there's so many ways of learning it. And we're going to learn the Pnei Moshe's Pshat, Chen v'ni kohen. Okay. So, by the way, so Kasha, let's leave it. And the Gemara did not answer why he gives him a week. He does not say why he gives him a week. So I want you to know that Rashi in Chulin, Bavli, Daf, Kuf, Lamed Beis, Amid Beis, says that says like this, that what's the week? Midoraisa, when a kohen shechs for himself, guys, he gets to keep it. There's no chiv on the kohen lechatchila. In other words, it's not like truma. By truma, I don't care if you're a kohen. The item is tevel. You have to separate it. Only question is, do you get to keep it? You got to give it away. A tabach, the Gemara says, and that's in Bavli, that what? That listen to this. That if you shech the meat for yourself, you're lechatchila not chayiv to give. When are you chayiv? When is a kohen chayiv? When he's in the business of selling it to others. So Rashi says like this, that when you open up a business of selling meat to others, who says you're going to succeed? My father, people used to come to shul, they would tell him the business that they're doing and how much money they're making. He used to tell them in Yiddish, just make sure you don't lose your capital. Halavai, you shouldn't lose money. You're making money. How do you know you're making money? You're going to lose money. That was his thing. So maybe you won't sell a shtickle meat. No one is going to buy you your smelly meat. So that's the pshat, that if a tabach, for the first week, you didn't even establish you have a business yet. maybe you're going to end up eating all the meat. That's why you get to keep it. When you establish yourself to be a businessman, how long does it take you by a tabach to be a businessman? 1 week. There was no refrigeration. That means if you didn't make it in 1 week, you're out. Then you're chayiv to, once you're chayiv to give it, now let's go to the pshat of Rabbi Yechanan, that we don't want to corner the market. So now we say you don't get to separate it and keep it, because then only the wealthy Kahanim are going to get beautiful. That's the Gemara over there. Now the Gemara says over here, let's chop another line. I know that Rabbi Blau is rushing. That chenvini koyin, what happens if you're not the butcher? A chenvini means you buy and you sell. You buy and you sell. So now the question is, if this guy is buying meat that wasn't yet matonoid, do you get to keep it? So Rabbi Yudan Amar, the same heter they gave to you for the tabach, they give for the chenveni. Point le Shabbos achas. However, Rabbi Yossi says, "Ein point le Shabbos achas." Why? What's the difference? L'maynaf, give me why. So the Gemara al datit Rabbi Yossi ma mechenveni ba tabach. So the Gemara answers, "Chenveni yochal laharim." Tabach and yochal laharim says the Pnei Moshe that a chenveni can buy animals from a yid to sell. And if he gets to keep it, even on the first Shabbos, then there's a sin happening over here. What's the sin? It wasn't. Let's go with Rashi. It wasn't. It was shechted by a Jewish butcher. It's chayiv to be separated. He buys it before the guy separated it. He's going to keep it. Can't do that. Masha'enken, he says a tabach doesn't sell the meat of others. That's the way it used to work. A tabach buys his own animals and he sells it. And since, like we quoted from Rashi, when you go into the butchering business, until you did business for a week, you're not even in business. So there's taka no chiyuv. So the heter of keeping it is only by a tabach, masha'enken by a chemini. To be continued. That's okay. That they